Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar presentation today on Cognos Analytics Joins and Unions. I'm Don Carnevale, Marketing Director at NeoSystems, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. I'd like to remind you that at any point during the presentation today, you can enter your questions in the Q&A area at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer those either along the way or we have a few minutes at the end as well. Now let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Rick Miller from Deltek. Rick?
I'm Rick Miller, Product Director for CostPoint BI. I've been with Deltek, I don't even want to say, but it is about 26 years. So been around a while, and going to talk to you today about some of the new features that have come into CostPoint BI, say 8.2.x here, because it's a combination of what came in with the 8.2 plus what's come in subsequent MRs, plus what's coming in the summer, which is coming very, very soon, the next release. So I'll go through those release numbers when I go through. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And there we go. So when you, and many of you, especially those in the cloud, have upgraded to 8.2 or will be very, very soon. Here are some of the top BI features that came in 8.2. First, which I like to mention, which got, a round of applause at ProjectCon before, and it's very, it's always the simple things, right? Is the BI is accessible at the second level of the menu, no clicking through business intelligence, business intelligence, business intelligence. You just get right to it on the second level of the menu. So a nice fix, easier to get there. But I thought I'd put that one first. And then get to the more detailed ones like project role security. I'm going to go into it a little more detail today, but there is a really great coffee break that Nikki Nixon did a couple of months ago, or yeah, wow, it's almost 2 months ago, about project role security. And I'll go through the list of coffee breaks later, but she gets into a lot of detail about how to set that up. Also, we added, along with the contracts and opportunities module, added org security in CostPoint to their domain. We also added it to our contracts and opportunities report, so it's kind of in sync with that release. So if you're using contracts and opportunities and you want to use org security with it and you're turning it on in CostPoint, it'll come through in the BI reports. Also, we have finalized our transition of unsecured legacy content to new secured models. Those are what the legacy models, the ones that end in CP, those are still out there that can be used. We are you'll see in 8.2 we have hidden them, but your reports will still run against them, and you can unhide them if you want to. But we're trying to discourage new users and others coming in from using the old CP models and using the secured models and new models we released in DQM, because those have the security, and those are the ones we update for new fields. Those are the ones we are maintaining, and they are now finally all updated. I think we had one left, which was the administration one, which came out in maybe, I don't know, 8.2.4. So there is a version of all of the CP models now in secured. And we've also expanded the library of reports, and I'm going to talk specifically about the project health report and the menu report, which are a little bit different than our usual reports that we issue with releases. So let's go into a little more detail on project role security. It does, previously you could limit a project to only the project manager seeing it, but there was really only one project manager on a project. So you were limited to that. And, everyone wants, well, I've got, assistant project managers, or someone I want to see at different, they see this level versus that level, or if they've got project analysts, other roles on the project that I want to assign to. So I'm not going to go into detail of how to do this here. There's a couple of the screens kind of showing in the projects of how you can assign people to roles on a project, but you can set up your own roles and assign people to it. And you can also, if you turn the role security on, it will secure it. So if your project analyst is assigned certain projects and they go into a report and you have the security on, they will only see the projects that you've given them, that you've set them up in the role security. So really nice feature worth looking into. something that some customers have done customized or various workarounds, but this is a very good direct way to do it from within CostPoint. We've applied it to the projects billing and accounts receivable reports. I think also to some of the data modules that are in the Smart AI. But as far as the packages, projects billing and accounts receivable, all will respond to the project role security. And it replaces the project manager security, otherwise known as CER _PM_MGR, so PM manager. If you're using that role, it will transition automatically when you upgrade to 8.2, and it will put everyone who's in that CER PM manager group into the project role security group. And if you have them, it will turn on the project role security flag. So there's really nothing you have to do. The project managers that you've set up are automatically in the project role security table. And we have more information on it. You see here, there's this KB article 115682 that you can get more detail about project role security, but also it has a slide on upgrade considerations with 8.2, but it gets very detailed, especially for certain use cases. So if you have upgraded or you're upgrading and you're wondering if there's anything you need to think about with BI, go to that KB article if you haven't done so already. And then this is just some notable features. I'm not going to go through all this in detail, but it'll be in the slide deck. Just a couple of comments about the project role security. Again, it's not just limited to the PM role. You can set up as many as you want, and you can assign it to lower levels. You can assign it at a top level and have it roll down. So you can, there's a lot of flexibility. It's managed separately from org security, but it is if you're using org security, it will look at the intersection of the two. So if you've got them as a role on a project that they don't have org rights to, they might not see that in keeping with the way CostPoint works. It's based on user ID instead of employee ID. When you put in the project manager in that field in CostPoint in the project setup, it uses the employee ID, and we're moving away from that for security and using the user ID. Again, I talked about this pre-populated. PM is pre-populated in that user flow table, and the automatic transition I talked to, but just a little more detail about all of those things. Okay, let's move on from that. The project health report. This came out, really it was initially intended for use with smaller customers in our kind of smaller customer version of CostPoint, but we decided to release it to everybody. It looks like a dashboard and it behaves like a dashboard, but it is actually technically with using Cognos, it is a report because we have more control over how the objects behave in drilling and things like that. And we have a better table structure to use here. So and this is intended to be used with the project role security. So you can, so they could, maybe they only have one role on projects, but if they have, they're a backup project manager on one and a project manager on another, they could filter by this if they want to. They can look at ITD or period to date, and they can go between target and actual or actual, I forget, is it actual revenue and target costs? I think that's the way it works. Anyway, that actual / target combination. So it gives you, and it's not just limited to project performance or PSR type information. You get accounts receivable, you get billing, invoices, unbilled analysis, backlog, and drills from each of these objects to reports, as well as drilling from the project, where you can get to the project master report, or I think to the PSR. And so you can get to lots of different drills in here, and it's really a good way to bring project reporting out to those that you're using project role security with, kind of a central place that they can see where they stand. And so that's something to check out. It is in the team content under projects is where you will find this project health. Okay, another one, the BI menu report. This is an interesting one, also introduced for the smaller customers, but when we showed it to other customers, they're like, well, we want this too. So what it does is it looks at the folder permissions for a person, and you'll see a menu tab when you go into BI. And instead of your users having to go down into all of the different subfolders, and now this is using the standard folders for now, but if you have the standard folders and they have reports that they see, this is a way that they don't have to drill in, oh, I have to go to billing and I have to go to projects and kind of go all the way around to do this, a way they can navigate to their reports much quicker. And also you see on the bottom here, you can manage the content here. It's like, well, we don't use the standard PSR that's showing up. So I'm going to turn that off, but I've got my own that I've created. So I can put the names of reports in here that are, if it's accessible for that person, your custom reports can show up on here as well. So definitely something to look into with the release to do the menu report. Now, if you're using a lot of custom folders and custom permissions, they may not see much when they go in, may see nothing, or they may see just the basic team content, and you can tell them to disregard it. But if you are using it, this could be really helpful. Okay, so that's the highlights of the 8.2.0. Now we get into after 8.2.0, which you will be getting when you upgrade as well, because you'll be getting through, I think it's 8.2.11 when you upgrade, but the summer release is 8.2.12 for your information. But we released a trial balance report, something that we've always wanted to add and was a highly requested item, where it compares to last year and shows all the periods. So a new trial balance report. Another thing we're doing with the reports now is we're designing them in a way that are more easily exportable, if that's a word, to Excel. So you can easily take them out to Excel and get good formatting in them. So that's the trial balance report. Also, we have the new AP aging report, and we're starting to do more, as we did with the project health report, combining more visualizations into the reports. So here we have some, and we're looking at doing also an AR aging in the future with a similar look and feel. That's on the ideas portal. Please go and vote for it if you like that idea. If you don't go to the ideas portal, you should go to it. I have to get a plug in for that, because we do, you probably heard us say this a million times, but us product managers like to go into, and we are expected to go into the ideas portal constantly and see what's getting votes and push them into features. And we've done that quite a bit. I think probably a couple hundred times now across CostPoint to bring ideas that come from customers into the product. So AR aging report, if you see it out there, go ahead and vote for it. But this one is released, which was actually on there before the AP aging with the charts. So it's something we didn't have before. We've added the AP aging. That will not, when you upgrade, you will not see that right away. When you upgrade the next time, which will probably, if for those in the cloud, would be depending on where you are or what pod you're in, July or August timeframe, you'll see the AP aging report. Also in the 8.2.12, we've done a lot with planning reports, and we went back and, the planning reports were built quite a few years ago, and didn't incorporate a lot of either updates in the products or new types of prompting or things that we've been putting in. So we had kind of a laundry list of items that we went through and did kind of an inventory of all the, I think, dozen or so planning reports, and did a bunch of updates to them. And so these are some of the things we did, like, multi-companies available in planning. So we have a company prompt, but a lot of other stuff too, like, the rate types were applicable, budget types for EAC or budget, active, inactive flags, which were added in planning, leveling prompts, organization prompts, couldn't say it, multiple selections on the project prompts, just really updated all these things. We added a PM prompt. Also, one thing that we're starting to do on reports is we figured out a way to expand the field widths for the select and search boxes. Sometimes you look and you see project numbers, and the description, it only shows a certain part of the description. Now we've made the widths wider, that it's easier to see the selections in there. Tooltips on the columns, I'll go through these in a minute. And then, also showing on the report, what's the period end date and the company that you've selected. So these reports have been totally revamped. We have one example here we'll go through, which is the project labor hour status planning report. You can see on the left, these were the prompts before, pretty basic. Now we've got a lot more prompting on there, company prompts, leveling prompts, all the things that I just mentioned are now added into this report, including, what budget. I think there's a budget version on this one. It's really small. I can't read it. Let me get closer to my screen. Include active projects, project level, budget and EAC. And then the report itself, a lot of things. We also went through, and yes, we did find some discrepancies in calculations or things that we were pulling that customers said, well, you don't really want, here's what ITD means to us. So we went in, we did update some filters and some calculations, the burn rate calculation, other things, but we also added column tooltips, so you can see in the reports, well, what does this mean? What's pending? How's the ITD burn rate calculated? All those types of things. So we've made quite a lot of changes, and this was kind of the bulk of our work in the 8212 was revamping all of these planning reports. So for those using planning, or those that want to, this is a great thing because it expands the report usage greatly in planning. So those are the major things. The other thing I wanted to mention was, as I talked about before, if you haven't gone, a lot of people have gone to these because we get, a lot of times 400 or 500 people on these BI coffee breaks. CostPoint has coffee breaks too, but since I'm BI, I'm only going to talk about BI right now. But they also have CostPoint across their modules have 2 a quarter. And for CostPoint BI, we also have 2 a quarter because they've been in such demand. So we've had a lot of them. This is the list on the right of all the ones we've had, from bursting to smart AI to a lot of them on dashboards. When we do new versions, like we did 11.2.4, we did a coffee break on that when we get to version 12 next year of Cognos. For those of you curious about that, we expect the long-term release candidate to come out at the end of this year. So we're hoping in the first half of next year to get Cognos 12 out. We'll have a coffee break about that probably in the first quarter of next year. But coming up in this quarter, we started a series of coffee breaks on writing BI reports against X package. So we're just going to run through the packages and talk about kind of best practices of writing a report against the projects package, maybe focusing on one of the report tables in there or something, but just, versus general report authoring discussions, we'll get into specifics about those particular packages, and we'll see how that goes. If they're popular, we'll kind of cycle through all the different modules, purchasing and people and AR and AP and all the others. So those are coming up in July and August. And then I think the last quarter we might not have any because of ProjectCon, but we will be continuing to a quarter starting, next year, probably doing more reporting modules and the Cognos 12. So that's my presentation and I'll look at the Q&A to see if there's questions and come back for questions later. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tawfiq to talk about, what is it, joining a union or joins in unions?
Oh, okay.
That's right. You don't have to join a union. You can join. There you go. Okay, go ahead, Tawfiq.
Thank you, Rick. All right, all good stuff and nice updates. So thank you for that, Rick. But as much as the folks at Deltek try to improve, and they are continuously improving these packages and these reports, we're going to talk about what we consider an advanced reporting tool related to joins and unions, and why you should bother to actually work on those. So my name is Tawfiq Habibi. I'm the Senior Vice President for Professional Services at NeoSystems. My background is in information management and enterprise reporting. I've been around, as you can see, for quite a number of years, and actually Rick and I go way back as well, many years now. So I've spent quite a bit of time with Cognos, starting with Impromptu and all the way, of course, to Cognos 11. So this afternoon, we're going to talk about introducing queries, joins, and unions. We're going to talk about some examples and use cases and basically wrap up with why should you bother, and kind of provide some examples around that. In most cases, the data that you source from packages is sufficient to meet your reporting needs. However, there could be situations where that may not be the case. As good as the packages are out of the box, there could be some use cases, and we'll talk a little bit more about those later on, where you might need to actually do some things, peel a couple of layers on the onion and kind of dive into the details of a report. And in order to do that, Cognos Analytics gives you access to some what we call advanced query tools. And these are designed to kind of help you address some specific needs at a report level. And they're related to the join tool, which basically creates a join relationship between two queries. There's also the union tool, and the intersect and the accept tools are similar. All three, the union, intersect, and accept, are basically the same tool in a lot of ways, with some slight variations that we'll also give examples on. So hopefully by the end of this webinar, you may not be an expert, but at least you'll know what it could take potentially to kind of get into that deeper level, if you will, on the back end of a report on the query side. So to start off, we'll talk about joins. So a join matches column values from two queries. And you end up creating one result set that combines the columns from both of those queries. And on the left-hand side of my screenshot, you'll see the result of that. So I have a query for project summary. I have a query for project info. I can join them together. And then that result is going to be columns from both of these queries that appear as one result set in my final query that then I can use in my crosstab or my visualization or my list report. Typically, the requirement is to have matching columns, one or more columns that you can basically use to do that join between the two queries. So there has to be some kind of common denominator between those. And in our example here, project ID would be the join field that we can join those two queries based upon. And if you had multiple columns, you can use them also by creating new links to join those two queries. Talk a little bit about join cardinality. This is where we're going to spend most of our afternoon here. So in addition to having matching columns, you also have to define what we call the cardinality. And that cardinality basically is a definition of the number of related rows between the two queries that you are trying to join. And you typically have to join that or define that cardinality to avoid double counting of any measured data, any numbers that you're summarizing. You may not want to double count or underrepresent the data that you have. In Cognos, the cardinality is reported as an x dot dot y notation, where the x indicates that the join is required, a 1, or optional, a 0. The y indicates the number of rows that could be matched, 1 to 1, or many rows as well. And this is very confusing for those who are not initiated with joins, so it could be a little hairy, but I have some examples for you in the upcoming slides that talk about each kind of those scenarios. But if we look at the four possible combinations are 0, 1, which means that the relationship is optional, but if there are matching rows, only one will be matched. 1-to-1 relationship means that it is required and only one record will be matched. 0-to-many relationship is also optional, but if there is a match, any number of records will come back. And if it's a 1-to-many relationship, that means it's required and any number of records will be matched. I typically also look at the relationship impact when you do define a join, and that usually explains what is going to happen. And that's why it's also considered best practice to give your queries more meaningful names when you actually create them, so that they kind of be more descriptive about that instead of using query 1, query 2, query 3, and so on, the default values. So let's take a look at a quick scenario here. We have two tables. One is a list of my project managers, and one is a list of my projects. And then the common field between them is that employee ID column. And if we look at the data in each of those two queries, you'll see that a project manager can match 0, 1 or more project records, and a project record can match 0 or 1 project manager record. So you'll see here, for example, the 0 is we have a Curly here, 222, but he doesn't have a match here. We also have a project here, 444, with the employee ID 444 that doesn't have a match here. So this would be a typical scenario in some situations where you have data from tables that you want to combine. And so we'll take a look at some of these definitions of the inner join, outer join, left join, and right join. So the first one is the inner join, where it's a one-to-one and a one-to-many relationship. And basically the end result of that join is going to be what is at the intersection of these two circles. I don't know if you remember these diagrams way back in school or even in your early years in school, but hopefully they are illustrative of what is happening here. And this inner join will bring back only the matching rows in both tables. And you'll see here, since we have Larry 111 and we have 111 here, the query will return the 2 rows, right? And that's designated by the N here, or many rows. You'll also see that we have Mo here, and there's 2 projects that Mo manages. So we'll get those 2 rows as well as part of that inner join. Curly is not managing any projects, so he falls off. And our project 100 here does not have any matches, so that gets dropped off as well. So the inner join is going to bring back only the matching rows between the 2 queries and present those in our result set. In our X example, known as a left join, so that is required on the left-hand side and optional with the 0 on the right-hand side. But if we do have matches, we could get many rows, okay? And so now, in this instance, this query will be a left join, and it's basically telling us that we're going to bring back a list of all of our project managers. And if there are matching projects, we will bring those back as well. And so you'll see here that the result set is all of our project managers. And Larry manages 2 projects and Mo manages 2 projects. Curly does not manage any projects, and so we will get null values. So a left join is advantageous in this instance if you are trying to do some kind of specialized reporting. For example, you're trying to find out which of your managers do not have a project assignment per se. And we can do the inverse of that, which would be a right join. So in this instance, we're requesting that the project manager join is optional. And if there is a match, we'll bring back the project manager. But we are interested in bringing back all of the projects from our project table, hence the right join. And so you'll see here in the result set, we'll get all of our projects, including the 111, 112, the 100, 101, and the 100 or 400100 project. And then if there is a match on the project manager list, those would be returned as well. And since it is a many relationship, we'll get a list of all of those. And so you'll see here that we identify in this result set that our project 400100 does not have a project manager. So this type of join will return all the project rows and any matching project manager rows, and it drops any unmatched project managers. And so you'll see here Curly does not appear in this list. And then the final example, which is known as an outer join. And basically this one is saying bring back everything from the left and bring back everything from the right query and display the result set. And so this one here brings back the rows from both ends. Matching records are married up together, and then no records are dropped from either query. So you'll get the complete result set. So you'll see here that we get Larry, Curly, and Mo appearing in our result set. You'll see all of our 5 projects also appear in this result set, and we'll get the null values where there is no match. And so now we can find out, for example, that Curly is not managing any projects, and this particular project is not managed by a project manager. A couple of things to caution from a reporting standpoint. We tend to prefer inner joins as much as possible. An outer join is the most expensive of these and could result in huge data volumes coming back. If you consider something like an outer join, for example, against some of the big tables like the general ledger table or your project summary tables. So you have to kind of be careful about those, try to apply filters to them as much as possible. But again, there could be scenarios where you might need to do this kind of reporting, what I would call maybe exception type reporting, to kind of retrieve the data that you are trying to look at and basically give you a foundation for further analysis. Okay. The next advanced tool we're going to talk about is union, intersect, and accept. And union, intersect, and accept allow you to combine 2 or more queries into one data set. And it's typically useful when you need to combine data from different data sources, or you might have a need to transpose columns into rows or vice versa. Okay, so typically I would use unions if I have data that's coming back in rows and I need to transpose it into columns, for example. I can typically use a union to combine that data into one result set and then do that transposition. However, in order to create unions and intersects and accepts, we have 3 basic rules that we have to follow, and those are required. There's no way getting around them. The first one is that the queries must have the same number of data items. So if your first query has 5 columns, your second query needs to have 5 columns. The data items must appear in the same order. So if the first field in your query 1 is project ID, the first item in your query 2 needs to be a project ID also. Okay. The data items must appear in that same order. And then finally, the data items must have compatible data types. So if the first column is a string, the first column in the second query needs to be a string. If the second column is a date, the second column in the second query needs to be a date, and so on and so forth. So these are the 3 rules that you must follow for a union to actually generate a result and not produce an error when you combine the queries. So they have to have the same number of data items, they must appear in the same order, and they must have compatible data types. Now, there could be situations where you don't, depending on the data, the underlying data, you don't have the same number of columns. In that instance, you would have to create them on your own as query calculations inside of your query. And you have to deploy or employ some techniques to kind of cover for that in order to meet that criteria or these 3 conditions that are required here. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. So you'll see here we have query 1 that has 2 columns and query 2 that has 2 columns. And since the 2 queries have 2 columns each, we met one of the criteria. Since the first column is a string in query 1 and the second column is a string in query 1, the first column and second column of query 2 are also strings. So we've met the same criteria there. And then both of these columns in both queries are in the same order. And that basically tells Cognos that these queries are legit and can be union together. Now, within the union tool itself, we have several options that we can set. And those options are mostly a property of the union a property sheet of the union queries that you can dictate whether to preserve or remove duplicates. So if you do a union all, and what happens is Cognos will return the results from query 1 and return the results of query 2 and should display all of the data here, including the duplicates as well. So you'll see here, for example, January Midwest appears twice because it appears twice, once in query 1 and once in query 2. The regular union displays and combines the items from query 1 and query 2 and removes the duplicates. So you'll see here, for example, January Midwest appears once, although in those 2 queries it appears there. So it basically, the union will combine the result set of both and remove the duplicates. An intersect property here will bring back items that appear in both query 1 and query 2 only. And so you'll see here that January Midwest appears in both. So it appears in this result. January Northeast appears in this one, but not in this one, so it falls off. And then January South and January West appear in both, so they are part of that result set. The Februaries fall off out of the result because they don't appear in both queries. And then the final example is the except, which basically shows you what appears in query 1, but does not appear in query 2. So the January Midwest appears, so that falls off. Northeast appears in query 1, but not in query 2, so that gets included. The South and the West appear in this query 2, so they fall off as well. In my experience, most of the time, I'd say probably the majority of the time, I am using a union where I want to join the two queries together, combine them, and make them appear as one data set, and remove any duplicates that appear. But again, you might have a reporting situation where you are trying to highlight these duplicates or figure out where they're coming from, and you can use a union all. Okay. So those are the advanced tools that are available in Cognos. I don't have any live demos today, but I am more than happy to do a follow-on if people are interested and actually show you with a live demo what we do with joins and what we do with union queries. A couple of things also to note with joins is that you can take, let me go back a few slides here. This is kind of the beauty of Cognos, and it's the piece where I say I've never met a report that I couldn't write, is because Cognos lets you do so much even behind the scenes with queries. But if you have a scenario where you have two queries that are joined together, Cognos will let you take this result set and join it to another query and then produce another second result set. And you can take that result set and join it to another query, and so on and so forth. So you can join queries and join queries and join queries if you have the business need for that or the use case for that. Again, a lot of these things that we're talking about here happen behind the scenes in the packages that you're using. And most of the time you don't need to do that. But I've seen scenarios also throughout the years where we might have to resort to that to take care of some specific reporting needs that might be more complicated or might be outside of the norm. The same thing happens with unions as well. You can union more than two queries together. A long time ago, I built a report for a customer that ended up with 42 queries that needed to be unioned. So, sometimes you'll get the use case for that, but as long as you follow the 3 rules for the unions, the same order, the same number of columns, and the same data types, you can union as many queries as you need to get into the final result set. So why bother? There could be scenarios where the data that you need is not in the same subject area or even part of the same package. So a good example of that might be even like in the materials package, you might want to report off of sales orders and manufacturing orders, for example. It used to be, I don't know if it's changed recently, but it used to be that those are different subject areas within the package, but I've run into scenarios where customers wanted to report off of both. Another example would be, in order to use joins inside of your report, is if you might have to do a self-join. So an example in this instance, your employee table also includes supervisor information, and you might have to join the two queries together or do a self-join to get a report, for example, who reports to which manager and vice versa. Another example is for exception reporting. So for example, if you wanted to find out which vendor is not selling your product. In our example with project managers and project IDs, by reutilizing joins, we were able to find out which project managers are not managing a project or which projects do not have a project manager assigned to them. Okay. And then we talked a little bit about data transposition, basically where you want to convert rows to columns or columns to rows of data. A good example of that, if you are trying to do some reporting, any kind of reporting, actually, if you consider the general ledger, it provides data by row. So you get fiscal year, period 1, fiscal year, period 2, period 3, all your data is in rows. Or if you're looking at data for 2023 and you want to compare it to data for 2024, all the data is in rows. You can use unions and joins to transpose that data into columns. So you can compare 2023 to 2024 and do some variance analysis on that. And then finally, a couple of examples where you might need to do joins and unions as well is if you want to compare, for example, data from different sources, from different source systems. So let's say you have your own internal financials and you want to compare them with third-party data that you bought from a third-party source to compare how you perform to other industries in your practice area. And another example, we use joins, of course, and unions is if you uploaded Excel data and you need to join that to your cost point data, you can use the same techniques and the same tools to join that data so you can align your, for example, budget data that's coming in Excel with your actuals that are coming from cost point. Okay. All right. I wanted to leave a few minutes to talk and answer any questions if anybody has any questions. I see one that showed up, I think. The question is, when considering the cardinality, do we take into account the filtering or not? I typically do my filtering in the 2 queries that I am joining. The earlier in the process you do that, the better off you would be. The cardinality is typically I just worry about the joins, project ID to project ID, org ID to org ID, and then I take care of the filtering in each of the individual queries if I need to. And sometimes you can also apply filters in the result set as well. And Cognos is smart enough to write that underlying query and send it to the database server to get the result. Okay. Any other questions?
Just as a reminder, if you do have any questions for Tawfiq or Rick, you can enter those into the Q&A area right here inside the Zoom window. We'll give you just a few more moments to enter those questions.
Hey, Tawfiq, while we're waiting, I have a question for you. Out of the 3 Stooges, which one was a accomplished violin player?
That's a good question. I think it was Larry.
You're right.
Yes. All
You
right.
win. Yes. Yep.
Yep.
Our goal here is to educate.
That's right.
Yep. Very good. Very
yeah,
good.
I don't know. I mean, I use Larry Curly because I'm dating myself, right? You can tell by
Yeah,
the white hair. So I'm not sure if others,
yeah, I know. Yeah.
if others are experienced with Larry Curly and Mo. If
Yeah, I
not,
know.
go look them up. So, so question from Landon here says, what type of outside data sources can I connect to cost point reporting BI? So there are 2 answers to that question. IBM, which is the underlying engine, the reporting engine, basically, if you have a driver for that underlying outside source, that database, and you can connect to it, you can report off of it. However, since folks are using CPBI, you are basically connecting to any data source that is associated with the Deltek schema, the cost point schema, the system that you are using. That's why it is advantageous to use things like external files and uploaded files for additional reporting, since you do have limitations to connecting just to the cost point schema.
Right.
Rick, anything you want to add to that? I know
just that
not a technical one, it's more of a licensing one, but
yeah, but in the cloud though, is the technical answer is even no, because you can't technically connect outside the cloud. So it is, as you mentioned, a lot of customers using the upload to Excel. So if, I think we have a training video on that on the DLZ, but it is a good way to bring in some other data, brings it into kind of a flat file format, but you can join them to with data module to other packages and things. So and
I've even actually, in a weird way, for some scenarios, I've created Cognos reports that dump data to Excel, and
Mhm.
then I bring it back in and
Yeah.
do joins to report
Right,
off.
right.
So there are some requests that show up for whatever reason, and sometimes that could be part of that solution.
Right.
We have another question also. I have reports which are not updating real time with cost point or time and expense. Do you know why that would be? Yes. So Cognos, basically when you are running a session or when you're developing a report, will tend to cache the data. There is a cache parameter there that if your underlying report does not change, it will reuse that cache data, which is basically in memory. And if you hit the report or just refresh the report or run the report again, it will just reuse that cache. It's not forcing a refresh of the data. So you could be entering transactions in cost point and you may not see them immediately until you actually close the report or rerun it. There is a query property that you can set to force Cognos to rerun that query every time. I just typically caution for that because it could have implications on the back end on the database side from a performance standpoint. But that's typically the reason why you may not see that refresh instantaneous is because of that cached data.
Yeah, I guess they could be looking at a pre-run report too.
That's true.
Or,
Yeah.
What we hear a lot too is people expect something to be there, but it hasn't been posted or updated, or the report table hasn't been updated yet.
Right.
And you expect it to be there, but it may not be there yet in the table. But when running BI or Cognos against tables, it should be querying that actual what's in the table if
Yep.
if it is in fact going through the query.
The property is, I think it's called processing. It's if we select the whole query and look at the property sheet, it is listed in there. I can actually look it up for you real quick. Give me 1 second. Right. Any other questions while I look that up? All right. I'm actually curious if anybody wants to answer, how many folks are seeing or learning about joins and unions for the first time? And how many folks have used them before? Or if you haven't, do you see a use case, a potential use case or scenario for using them going forward?
Yeah, it's definitely an important concept in reporting where you have a field that's just in another table and you need to add it onto your report. It just becomes, it gives you so much more flexibility.
So that property is called use local cache.
Mhm.
And it is towards the bottom of the property sheet. And the default is what it reads from the package, but you can override that with a no and force the query to refresh. Okay.
Okay.
Very good. Again, this is a testament to Cognos' ability to actually let you create reports that can be as complex or as simple as you need. We tend to use it quite often in certain scenarios, joining fields, doing unions and transpositions. But again, as the packages are basically becoming now even more solid than they used to be, they meet most of the reporting needs for everybody. But I know there are scenarios where you might have to jump and do some of these, I guess, extraneous type of activities from a reporting standpoint. The examples I went through in the slides, I think, are going to be available, Don, for folks if they want them. It's kind of a good reference to remind you, especially with those diagrams and examples. So we'll certainly make those available to everybody.
Yeah, there's a question there.
Yeah.
Just came in.
Would setting the cache query refresh also refresh SQL objects used as data sources? I think it does. But I think Cognos, well, it's not a property per se within the SQL if you're using that. However, on the query itself associated with that SQL, there is the option to use local cache, yes or no. So that setting would also force Cognos to run that query every time. When joining, do the fields you are joining with need to be the same data type? For instance, employee ID. Typically, yes. Cognos will return an error if you're trying to join a string with an integer, for example. So typically you would join like for like. What I have done before, a couple of things I have done before in a sneaky way. One of them is not so sneaky. You can create a query calculation. So let's say you do have an employee ID that is a string in one table and an integer in the other. You can cast by using a query calculation, convert that string to an integer or that integer into a string or vice versa. So can use a query calculation in your join. And not to muddy the waters, but I have created before what I would call a dummy join. So I might be joining two queries that have nothing to do with each other, but I create a query calculation that is a dummy query calculation that has maybe a string or a numeric value and use that as a join as well. You just kind of have to know what you're doing there and what you're expecting with the results, but you can create your own query calculations basically to make sure that the data types are the same. How can you tell what data type it is? So there is a property that is associated with fields inside of a package. Once you open up the package in the insertable objects pane, you can right-click on that object. And there is I can't remember specifically what it is, but there's a trail that tells you what data type it is and where it came from in the package. And that usually gives you a hint as to what data type that could be. The other thing you can look for in the packages that you're using, I don't know if you've noticed, but in the newest version of Cognos, there are little icons next to the data items. So the icon that says ABC typically tells you that it is a string. A hashtag will tell you that it is a numeric value. An icon that looks like a ruler, which is another word for measure, tells you that it is a number that is summarized, a numeric value that you summarize. And then if it's a date field, it'll have a clock next to it. So that always gives you a hint also as to what data type it is. One more question, is using joins and unions to pivot rows to columns have faster performance than creating a crosstab report? In certain scenarios, it does. It just depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Sometimes I find crosstabs a little bit too finicky because of how they react and behave. And also sometimes I want to do certain things at the intersections, and I might prefer to use a list in that instance than a crosstab report. And so that's why sometimes I resort to using a join or a union to do that transposition. It's just really going to depend on the use case and what it is that you're trying to accomplish. But I find that a list report sometimes is easier to deal with, even if I have to manually create those columns myself by using if-then logic, than having to deal with a crosstab. But it just depends on what my reporting use case is and what ultimately the end result is going to be, like the output. Am I going to do further processing if I dump this to Excel? Is a crosstab the best fit for that or not? So it's just going to depend on the use case.
All right. Thank you, Tafiq. Could you mind going to that next slide, Tafiq, where we've got contact information for
Absolutely
you and Rick? This will conclude our webinar today. I want to thank Rick and Tafiq for great presentations. Certainly want to thank everyone for attending today. As Tafiq mentioned, we will be making available slides from today's presentation as well as the recording of the event. You will be receiving some email in the coming days with links to view those at your leisure. So again, thank you all very much for attending. This concludes the webinar. We hope you have a great day. Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.